Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 961. Bottom of the barrel. The immortal looked into their eyes, and a tense silence filled the room. But why all of a sudden? From what I understood, they didn't show any great interest so far, Jane finally asked. That is true, the scum you have met so far, apart from me, has been the bottom of the barrel. None of them can really compare to what is about to happen, you affirmed. Hearing that their experiences with cultivators were only the tip of the iceberg, or rather the bottom of the barrel, left a few of them with worried expressions. What about the guys I met at the bridgehead? Seth asked, curious. The people he had met there were definitely on another level than the ones he met and heard about around Delta and Y City. He was interested in where they ranked in the greater scheme of things. On the continent? Below average. About upper middle within the Xiguang province. You measured the power of the border sects that had united to profit from Earth. You still didn't tell us why. And what is the Immortal Summit? Lena mentioned before they drifted too far off topic. They needed to understand the full situation. With a nod, the old man came back to the topic and explained to them what the Immortal Summit was and what had happened there. He explained about the weird anomaly of the connection with Earth, as well as the plans of the cultivators to storm this world and find the reason before any harm came to their province. So, Earth is really going to face an invasion of cultivators this time. Seth muttered. That is why I came here as fast as I could. I don't know for certain how long the sects will actually prepare, or how quickly they will get here without any guide, but I doubt it will take longer than 4 weeks before you hear of them. Especially the Dark Path will storm in with all their cruelty, you added. Judging by the scale the old man was talking about, what had happened so far was mere child's play compared to what was about to happen. The bard had already understood that there was a vast difference in quality between the different stages of cultivation, but also within the stage itself. If the big guns of this Xiguang province decided to swarm their world, there was no telling what they would do. Nobody in the room had a high opinion of these invaders. Apart from Master Mountain, the few they had met and fought were a bunch of power-hungry lunatics doing whatever they wanted. You know your people the best. Do you have any advice to prepare before they arrive? Seth asked the man calmly. Is he trustworthy? Should we tell him about the system? She asked after hearing the reason for the sudden invasion. Seth, Lena, and most of the people in the room knew the most likely reason why the voracious cloud continent was unable to devour Earth. The system. Everyone who lived long enough in a world of the pathworks, that was added to the system, knew the reason. When the system god came to the world, his system undid the catastrophe and impeded or stopped all apocalypse scenarios, to the point that people may struggle to survive, but have a chance. This was the only reason anyone in Earth was not yet absorbed by manic trees, infected by soul-ripping disease, or any other kind of fearsome catastrophe that could wipe out players in a matter of weeks. It was the only logical conclusion, that a predatory world that came to suck up all the magic was also stopped. Even if Earth had existed without magic before, with how the world became, it was impossible to survive without it. However, the bigger reason was probably because it was time for the voracious cloud continent to struggle. The continental mosquito had pricked the wrong god this time. There was a high chance the curious eyes of the system god were now directed at the voracious cloud continent, too. There is an easy answer, but it is hard to accomplish. An alliance with a powerful sect could discourage many cultivators from causing trouble. As much as I would like to offer an alliance with my sect, I'm not in a position to offer something like that. I'm ashamed to say, we probably wouldn't be enough to dissuade others, either, you answered, visibly guilty that he couldn't give them a ready solution. I think that should answer your question. I think we should tell him, Seth answered. All right, I will trust you on this one. The question was, how to tell him? How would they react if they found out that a god was taking his liberties with their world? Despite such doubts, Seth was convinced that this was the moment to trust each other. They would need use knowledge and assistance in the future. We believe to know what the cause of this is, Seth began carefully. Really? If you tell me, maybe we can stop any greater harm to your people, you said optimistically. He thought that if they could give the other sects the reason why it was happening, they would have to concentrate on solving the problem instead of making trouble. Well, you see. I'm sure you heard of the system god before. Master Mountain had traveled around Earth for a while and had obviously heard from players about this enigmatic existence before. Yet, it was only after Seth struggled to explain their theory, that he made a connection between what was happening to the world passage and the god. Do you really think a god could be able to do something like this? The immortal asked doubtfully. He had heard of gods before, or rather what he associated with ghosts were a kind of totem spirit like the barbarians in the far south used to borrow power from. I don't know what kind of god you are thinking of, but someone like the system god could definitely do it, Seth assured. He doubted that stopping the voracious cloud continent was harder than reverting time on Earth. This is worrying. Very worrying. If other sects learn of this they might turn hostile to the inhabitants of Earth, he said worried. Even more hostile? Jonah asked sarcastically. However, Yo answered him seriously. The dark path will use any excuse to act even less constrained. Although many of the white paths are no better than the dark path, they at least try to maintain their image. Things will become infinitely worse if they have a justification, he warned honestly. They gulped. Despite having confidence in the strength of Minasmar, the weight in Yu's voice forced them to take him seriously. I originally wanted to stay, but I believe I have to return and speak with my sect leader about this. Chapter 962 Crown of Death. Seth stayed in bed a while longer, together with Finn and Mina. Considering the heavy discussion yesterday, they all welcomed the distraction. The blacksmith showed up in his workshop sometime around midday. Feeling much calmer, Seth was ready to start the last stretch, which had just become that much more important. With a lining of death fabric, the headpiece had the least fabric, and such was the first he wanted to start with. The lining of death fabric was not the only thing special about it. The elaborate circlet with the fine veil of chainmail was enchanted with a new enchantment, Seth had created with the help of Sivri, Finn, and his lucky trinket ring. Murmur was a dreadful demon who could put tremendous pressure on the mind of the summoner. Since Evie would take this role if she decided to sacrifice undead to Murmur, she would need a high resistance to mental corruption. With combined luck and expertise, they had managed to fuse the Mind Cocoon enchantment he had purchased a long time ago and the Master Tier Willpower enchantment, creating the Mind Defender circuit, that raised a mental barrier based on the user's willpower plus 75. It was the only usable result after 2 hours of trying and a great asset for the future concerning Mad Ithildan and the Lunacy set. Seth had almost spent the longest time enchanting the headpiece with the modified Master Tier enchantment, so much so his back had started creaking. Now, another not-so-short enchanting session was waiting for him, because he had chosen to double down on the Mind Defender. Evie was going to need all the mental protection she could get. The soul in question was that of the magic swordsman with the special mana trait, and the enchantment was the Master Tier enchantment of intelligence. This way the headpiece was an almost pure mage item. Forging the soul circlet was quick, enchanting not so much. Still, it was the easier part, considering that the easiest part may become the hardest this time. Forging the soul took longer this time because Seth tried to take extra care to have the soul armament resemble the headpiece as closely as possible. He did everything he could to make the infusion easier on himself. However, at some point, he could no longer stall for time and finished the soul armament. Here we go, he said to himself and remembered how he had done it with the golden fleece. With his mind's eye, he tried to feel and picture the many fibers and threads of the fabric, as he used soul infusion to connect the yarn and soul with each other. However, unlike with materials that aligned with his class, Seth had a hard time influencing the fabric with his ability. He felt like a deaf man, wandering in darkness. Compared to the lining, the soul easily slipped into the enriched necron. To Sivri, it looked like Seth was simply standing there doing nothing for almost half an hour, after which he suddenly exclaimed. Aha, startling the golden automaton a little. After blindly reaching around in the darkness, the blacksmith had finally caught onto a clue. If metals and other materials that were judged to belong to his class and burned like a signal flare in the sense of the soul infusion, then fabrics were almost invisible. But they were not intangible. Once Seth caught onto the feeling, he didn't let it go. Now that he knew what he was looking for, he was able to slowly approach the act of infusing the soul into the fabric. The tight and complicated weave slowly took shape before his mind's eye and Seth started connecting the soul thread by thread like he would with a chain mail, or like he did with the golden fleece. Only that this was much finer and harder and more complicated to do. The bard started sweating from the mental strain and concentration it took to keep up the action of infusing the soul. He had to finish it in one go. Despite only being a small piece of fabric, Seth felt like he was sitting in place for hours and he one by one besoiled the threads. Despite his fatigue, his heart couldn't help but beat fast. His approach was working. He was able to use the ability on something he had no connection through the system or his class. It was always something special, to succeed based on one's own efforts and struggles. Gasping and drenched in sweat, Seth fell back in his chair. He was finished, and the notifications rang in his head. Ding! You have created a legendary item. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Ding! You have gained 100p power of existence. Seth cocked his head. Legendary? Blinking, he stared at the headpiece. Had he really managed to create a legendary item without using a legendary material? This was the first legendary item he created without using legendary material or the direct blessing of gods. He did not feel like this accomplishment was diminished by the fact that he used an extremely special material in cooperation with a very special tailor. Crown of Death. Death set 1/X. Physical DEF, 900. Mag, Def 1375. 1 Death Domination. 2+2 Sword Aura. 3 Trait, Mana Monstrosity. 4 Mind Defender Factor 2 Authentication. 5 Active Skill, Suicide. Set Effects, to be updated. A headpiece that spells death for the wearer and his enemies. A diabolical piece of equipment created by Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter, and Master Blacksmith of Earth with the help of Master Booz, the first Tailor Master of Earth. If the wearer is lucky enough to survive wearing it, they may never be bothered by mental attacks again. Seth stared at the option of the Mind Defender for a while. This had to be the reason it had directly jumped to legendary. The effects of the enchantment had more than doubled, compared to what it was supposed to be capable of. Mind Defender Factor 2 Authentication. 1 + 180 Willpower. 2. The wearer gains 65% resistance to mind effects. 3. Negative status effects that are judged hostile are weakened by up to 50%. 4. Mental power is increased by 15%. Seth couldn't help but suspect that this was not only the result of putting the same enchantment on the item twice. If he had to guess, which he had to, then the two enchantments had not only reacted with each other but also with a property of the knight's soul. Whatever it was, Seth was glad it happened, since it made him feel a lot better about the enchantment he chose for the gloves. While the strength circuits he used on the gauntlets themselves were rather harmless, the enchantment he chose for their soul wasn't. For the gauntlets, he had fused 2 of the souls, one excelling in pugilism, the other in swordsmanship, and the soul enchantment was a reason why the blacksmith decided to connect the 2 gauntlets like this. The piece he wanted to engrave was a poem called Cantori's Right, Modernese Left by the demon bard Alessa. It had the effect of imbuing specific powers into the left or right hand of a set of gloves or gauntlets. By enchanting it on the shared soul, he fulfilled the requirement of it being not just a pair, but a set of gloves. The text itself spoke of brood brothers, Cantori and Moderni, the 2 sides of the same coin. One a powerful magician with an incredible aim, the other a brute, with the power to crush and bury enemies in a single strike. The enchantment would improve the power and precision of magic used with the right hand, while it would improve physical damage and defense on the left. It was just right for someone like Evie who would keep switching combat styles. Channeling the power brought a heat and he felt 2 pairs of eyes on himself. The price for this demonic enchantment was the corruption of battle frenzy. It was a danger as well as a buff. As long as Evie could keep a clear mind and resist the temptation, it would only boost her power. Originally, Seth was ready to try and mitigate the worst case of her becoming a demon of battle, by paying a heart-wrenching number of souls. However, his worries calmed considerably. Even if he didn't mitigate it, she would probably be fine, unless she was going to repeatedly fall into a state of mindless slaughter. On second thought, Seth still paid a great price, he rather didn't specify to disarm the side effects at least partially. After the last rune was written and the gaze of the demons in his back vanished, he stood once again before the hurdle of infusing the soul into the fabric. This time he had prior experience and he could still remember the feeling of infusing a soul over hours, vividly. He hardened his will and started the process of arduous infusing the soul armament fiber by fiber into the fabric. After his first time, things went much quicker as had some practice and already started getting the hang of it. Was it really just him getting better at it? The increase in speed even surprised Seth and then, finally, the notifications rang, bringing him an unsuspected but welcome surprise. Ding! You have created a relic. Ding! You have created a relic. Ding! Your skill Soul Infusion Leave 8 had become Soul Infusion Leave 9. His skill actually leveled up. Chapter 963 Cantori Moderni. After making an improvement on his own, Soul Infusion finally improved to level 9. And not a moment too early, as he was going to face the end boss next. But first, he checked out the pair of gauntlets that gently floated towards him from the center of the waters of Styx. Cantori's left. Relic. Death set 1/X. Physical damage, 900. Mag damage, 0. Physical DEF, 1700. Mag, Def, 1250. 1 Death Domination. 2 plus 75% defense. 3 plus 2 to all basic knight type skills. 4 plus 250% fist damage. 5 plus 70 strength. 6 active skill, suicide. 7 active skill, Cantori's Widowmaker. 8 plus 3000 mana. Set effects, to be updated. 1 of a pair of gauntlets that spell death for their wearer and his enemies. A diabolical piece of equipment from the hands of Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter, and Master Blacksmith of Earth, with the help of Master Booz, the first Tailor Master of Earth. Once rumors of the armor's power spread, the item is guaranteed to become legendary. Modernese right. Relic. Death set 1/X. Physical damage, 0. Mag damage, 900. Physical DEF, 1250. Mag, Def, 1700. 1 Death Domination. 2 plus 2 to all basic knight type skills. 3 plus 65% critical damage. 4 plus 250% power of spells. 5 plus 70 strength. 6 active skill, suicide. 7 active skill, Modernese aim assist. 8 plus 3000 mana. Set effects, to be updated. 1 of a pair of gauntlets that spell death for their wearer and his enemies. A diabolical piece of equipment created by Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter, and Master Blacksmith of Earth with the help of Master Booz, the first Tailor Master of Earth. Once rumors of the armor's power spread, the item is guaranteed to become legendary. The special thing about this pair of gloves, apart from the options, were the 2 demonic skills. Active skill Cantori's Widowmaker, no cost, cooldown, 5 minutes. A mighty overhead strike that lends its power from the demon Cantori. Deal more damage the weaker the opponent. 30% chance to turn weak enemies to mush plus 500% physical damage. 50% chance to ram equal enemies into the ground. Plus 250% physical damage. Plus 150% physical damage against stronger enemies. Active skill, Modernese aim assist, no cost, cooldown, 5 minutes. Modernese power will guide your aim. Plus 15% crit chance. Simple spells will have a homing effect. Medium spells can adjust their trajectory. Advanced spells can slightly correct their course. Both skills were horrifying in their own right, but after thoroughly investigating the items, he could no longer delay the inevitable. Now it was time to face the final item of the set, the Garment of Death. A whole gambeson that went all the way down to knees. Just thinking of how long this would take, after spending an hour on the tiny gloves, had the blacksmith sweating. As much as he wanted to push it to tomorrow, he also knew that his chances were the best with he struck the iron while it was hot. As such, Seth took the last soul, one of a corrupted paladin. It boasted several defensive skills, as well as proficiency in manipulating divine aura, which was helpful to a chosen like Evie. Seth took extra care, working the soul armament as detailed as possible, even more than the lining or the gloves. When he heard how low the garment's durability was, his decision of what enchantment to use on the soul he would infuse was already set. The circuit Seth was engraving onto the soul was the enchantment of the broken shield, that could raise the strength, endurance, and durability of the item at the same time. Although it was another master tier enchantment, it was incomparable to what came after he finished, infusing the soul garment into the actual gambeson. The task was much greater than any of the previous items, but the level up eased the pressure noticeably. Although the lining and gloves could not compare to the complexity of the quilted and padded structure of the gambeson, the blacksmith didn't feel overwhelmed as he started sensing the garment. Once he started working, all the worries drowned in the absolute focus of the craftsman. Only the current task was on his mind. Thread by thread he sunk deeper into his work. Just like his worries, time flew by unnoticed. Sweat ran down his brow into his eyes and his head started thumping, but the progress of his work kept him captivated. Distractions were unable to take away his focus, and the soul armament was slowly knitted into the garment of death. From the seam to the waist to the collar and the arms, the dark thread with an aura of death was filled with soul. It was deep in the night when the blacksmith's concentration finally broke. He had just finished infusing the last bits around the left cuffs. He gazed at his work for a moment in a stupor, as if he couldn't quite grasp what he had just done. His head was simply empty. After this short while passed, Seth sat down with a heavy sigh, filled with relief. He did it. He had succeeded in the task that had made him the most nervous and on edge since forever. Seth had no clue when he last felt like this. Maybe during the time when he created the Scorpio armor, when he worked with the dragon scales, knowing that there was no replacement if he messed up. After taking a breather, he was back in the game. It was not over, yet. The last step was still missing. Carefully, the blacksmith brought the black gambeson up to the floating sphere of waters of Styx, which gently absorbed the fabric. The garment of death floated into the center of the sphere, and only after a moment, Seth finally got the notifications. Ding! A synergy between powers has changed your item. Ding! A synergy between the item, your crafting station, and your trait, Olympian Myths has changed your item. Ding! The nymph Styx shows interest in your item and lends some of her power. Ding! You have created a legendary item. Ding! You have gained 100p power of existence. Ding! You have created a magnum opus. Plus 10 to all attributes. Your title, World's Best Blacksmith, has slightly improved. Ding! Your willpower has reached 400 points. You have gained the trait, Adamant Will. Shocked, he stared at the garment of death, which was innocently floating in the waters of Styx. There were several things that shocked him, as he had not expected any of them. While he was suddenly flooded by a wave of notifications, one happier and more shocking than the other. His trait and his crafting station suddenly had a synergy with the garment of death. Looking back, it seemed like a likely chance considering the water of Styx, the garment of death, and a soul being involved in it all. But it didn't happen with the gloves or headpiece, so how could he have expected that? In addition to the unexpected synergy, an Olympian deity had also taken an interest in the item. The last time he heard a similar message was when Gaia suddenly appeared and blessed Python as the reincarnation of the Olympian deity, Python. But he had not much time to think of Styx now, as his brain short-circuited the next moment when he heard that the armor of death set was judged as a magnum opus. A wave of gratification washed over him, making his knees weak as he felt his status improve tremendously. Especially when he heard the next message, he felt that the hard work deep into the night was worth it. His willpower, which had been stagnating at the cusp with 397 points, had finally breached the 400 points mark, and he gained a new trait. Checking his status, he found that Adamant Will not only raised the modifier for mental power per point of willpower by 2 but also added 25% to his base resistance against mental effects. This really made working late worth it. Although Leroy gave immunity to these kinds of effects, too, he couldn't wear the helmet all the time. Also, there was a difference between the two. His inherent willpower and resistance also made it harder for Seth to fall into despair or depression. This was something an external tool could not accomplish. It showed its use just a moment later when Seth attempted to appraise the garment of death to see what exactly had changed because of the synergies. Because it was still cloth armor, he couldn't appraise it. He would literally have to go and ask Nico Booz to appraise it for him. Maybe it was time he also raised his sewing to at least the craftsman tier. At that point he would probably be able to appraise up to legendary clothing items. It would take quite some time, but he seriously considered it. That's how hard it irked him, that he not only couldn't check it immediately but even had to ask someone else to tell him the effects of his own item. An item that was part of his magnum opus. Someone would have to suffer for this. Chapter 964 Garment of Styx. The one to suffer immediately was Nico Booz, as he suddenly vanished from his warm and soft bed, where he had slept beside Allison. The tailor appeared in his workshop, only wearing his pair of boxer shorts. The cold floor against his back immediately had him wide awake. Kyaa. A high-pitched screech escaped his throat when woke up in a dark room, and saw a towering dark figure, looming over him. Nico, you need to appraise this, the tower master ordered him with manic eyes, holding up the pitch-black garment of death. Had the blacksmith finished it? Had the blacksmith kidnapped him from the side of his girlfriend in the middle of the night, just to appraise an item for him? Yes, he did. The tailor wanted to complain and curse, but all his grumbling got stuck in his throat when he threw an appraising glance at the garment of death. The item had gone through a great change under the hand of the tower master. Garment of Styx. Legendary. Death set 1/7. Physical DEF, 900. Mag, Def, 1300. Durability, 2900 plus 1000. 1 Death Domination. 2 Item can't be damaged by physical attacks. 3 plus 150% power to divine skills. 4 plus 105 strength. 5 plus 105 endurance. 6 Dipped in sticks. 7 Active skill, suicide. 8 Active skill, shield of faith. 9 Active skill, death ward. 10 Passive skill, skin of sticks, sealed. Set effects. Active skill, suicide is changed to active skill, aura of decay. Trait, master of necromancy. A garment that can spell death or life for the user. A diabolical piece of equipment created from the cooperation of Master Booz and Master Smith, the first Master Enchanter, and Master Blacksmith of Earth. The nymph Styx has taken interest in the item and lent some of her strength. Bringing it to a temple of Hades or Persephone might have the nymph Styx give her blessing to such extraordinary clothing. Part of the armor of death, a magnum opus by Master Smith. The tailor almost choked. What was all this? The defense had more than tripled. He clearly remembered the durability was only 750 before over 100 to several attributes. What in the world was dipped in sticks? Nico took a moment to wrap his head around the new effects, enchantments, and skills the garment of sticks now offered. The cause for the new name was most likely this effect dipped in sticks, which made the gambeson able to invalidate damage from ordinary weapons. He had no idea where the paladin skills came from, whereas the death ward definitely wasn't what he remembered of the skill. Wasn't it supposed to ward off death? This skill created an area filled with the aura of death, kind of the opposite. Shield of faith? That still seemed normal. Towering over these all were the set effects. The first got rid of the only drawback of the item and turned it into a powerful attack skill. Master of Necromancy on the other hand doubled the effects and power of all necromancy spells and raised necromancy by an entire tier. All of his shock and questions were overshadowed by the feelings caused by the item description. He felt a warmth deep in his chest when he found that he was not only mentioned in the description but that he was mentioned first. As a result, he felt even more touched when he found out the Styx was not just interested but even willing to give a blessing. Would this blessing reveal what the sealed skills could do? The tailor wondered. I can see that you appraised it. Write the information down for me, hurry. I want all the details, Seth demanded of him. Now, Nico understood why the blacksmith was so intent on knowing the effects. After all, this was part of his magnum opuses. Taking pen and paper, he quickly wrote down everything he saw. When he finally got the note from Nico, Seth rapidly calmed down. Although it was not the same as seeing it himself, his heart still raced when he saw the effects of the synergies and the various skills the item had inherited from the soul. Reading about the improvement is durability and defense, he questioned why he had gone to the trouble of increasing the durability. His only soothing was the thought that there might not have been a synergy without it. When the improvement of the stats made him question his choice in enchantments, dipped in sticks made him question why he even made an armor for Evie, when this gambeson alone was already as good as wearing a legendary armor, anyway. Negating the damage of ordinary weapons was almost as good as the weapon damage negation of his own armor. The only reason it was worse, was that it wouldn't work against weapons that were out of the ordinary. This distinction was drawn between the epic and relic rating. This meant relics and legendary armaments would still be able to hurt Evie, despite the garment. He felt complimented that even the gods acknowledged their work, but where would this end when visiting the temple of Hades or Persephone could lead to the gambeson being blessed by Styx, further enhancing the protective capabilities of his magnum opus? Would Evie even need the rest of the armor if Skin of Styx was unlocked? As for Evie as the chosen of Persephone, if she really went to the temple of Persephone, would she just get the blessing of Styx on her gambeson? With her luck, her patron might even bless the whole armor for her. Although Seth may have sounded like he was grumbling at the start of that sentence, he had a change in thought at the end of it. If Persephone were to bless the armor on top of what it already could, TI would be even better for him. There was no question about doing it or not. Even if it meant that Evie would have to go on her own pilgrimage, similar to Mike. Even if she had to visit another world to do so since there were no temples of Hades on Earth. Maybe it was good for Evie and some of the others to get out and see a different world, for once. Like a vacation, they deserved it. Now he only had to convince Evie that she deserved a vacation in a different world. It might be hard to persuade her and some of the others with the current situation on Earth, he wasn't that sure himself, whether it was a good idea to do it immediately. But on the other hand, maybe it was better to hurry because of the situation. If their resident necromancer queen became even stronger before things started to escalate, the escalation might not be as bad as it would be otherwise. "See, can I go to bed now?" the tailor asked weakly, disrupting his thoughts. "Oh. Yeah, sorry Nico," he said apologetically. "Don't mind it, I understand your reaction," Nico assured before the tower ego teleported him back to his room. Seth also realized how late it had gotten. It was almost morning now and the fatigue of the work he did caught up with him. With a sigh he put the garment in his inventory. He returned to his quarters to take a shower and sneak to Finn and Mina in bed. Chapter 965 Morin 2, 4. Unclaimed Mountains, Morin 2. The party managed to make an appointment with the Lord as Ray's coins didn't seem to run out. Despite some heavy bribery, they were still forced to stay in the City of Bandits for another 2 days because that was the earliest date the Lord had a free spot. It didn't mean they suffered during their stay. Ray had rented out a whole residence in the second ring for them. Afterward, the Saint of Solfium would often leave over the day and return with groups of slaves. There was little rhyme or reason to who he bought. There were citizens of Earth, some who had been traders or guards, but there were also people of all kinds of races who seemed to have been captured after coming through the patchworks. The Lord's outspoken hostility to all invaders meant that the peaceful ones were treated exactly the same as the hostile ones. Mike and Lydia understood that he did this for their sake since this was the easiest way to release them out of the system of slavery. The Saint simply bought them, with the intent to release them later on. Although the slaves had a hard time believing it because of Ray's aura and appearance, Mike and Lydia knew better. However, "Where did you get all this money?" Mike finally couldn't stop himself from asking. There was only so much one could loot from dungeons and bandits. The Chosen of Mahis also felt conflicted about handing so much money to these criminals. Wouldn't it all just be used to pull even more people into the system? "Mike, did you think I was wearing these rags for fun?" Ray asked him at the time, stumping Mike with the question. "These are my holy robes, Mike. Do you know what one of the special effects is? I can use the dark power I have collected to appease whatever negative or destructive emotion or trait a person may have, at least temporarily." "What does this have to do with the money you are spending?" the beastman asked, even more confused. Ray gave him a mysterious smile before explaining. "It technically means that I could create the illusion of a willing partner for a lusty person. A massive meal for a gluttonous person. Or I can produce as much money as I want in front of a greedy person. Don't worry about what this money may be used for afterward, as it never actually existed in the first place. All the money I used on bribes or pay for the slaves will miraculously vanish within a week. What if they spent it at that time?" Mike asked after a moment. "Wouldn't it harm others then?" "They won't. Can you distinguish one silver coin from another? They will subconsciously hold onto the fake and only spend real money. It even works with the system inventory. I tested it," Ray assured him. At least this explained why the Saint was squandering money like a nouveau riche. He didn't lose anything in buying these slaves. Before their appointment with the Lord, Ray had filled the big residency to the brim with people who had been captured in the Unclaimed Mountains. They had even spoken about offering them to come along with them when they returned to Mina's March. They could leave them in Thres, or maybe one of the tree stations. However, this was a topic for later, as the day of their appointment had come and the three arrived at the gates of the Lord's mansion in the early morning. They would finally meet Shaolun, the Lord of Morin II. Over the past 2 days, they had enough chances for more calm conversations with, name of the receptionist, and she told them more about this Lord of the Crime City. Apparently, he was a man with a unique class. Not much about it was known, but the people on the streets suspected it was some kind of enchanting class. After all, he was able to create the slave ring, and even the crime lords feared the troops of the city lord, he himself called the ring ghouls. They wore dark robes that hid their identity because they were strong bandits and criminals who were caught and experimented on by Shaolun until they became his mindless servants, according to rumors. What wasn't just speculation, was the power of these ring ghouls. They knew no fear nor pain and their bodies were tough like wood. Weapons would be deflected or got stuck in their bodies, while they would mercilessly cut down anyone who went against the city lord. The group was able to witness them in person, during a skirmish in the third ring. Some people seemingly had a discord over money matters and started fighting in the city. Mike and Lydia had to admit that these ring ghouls were comparable to the golem knights that guarded the tree stations. As they came before the residence of the Lord, the same dark-cloaked figures stood guard at the gates. There was also a normal guard, a head shorter than the figures, who stepped up to speak. "Halt! What do you want? Do you have an appointment?" The man spoke in a haughty manner, confident back his support in the back. We actually do. I'm Dick, this is Harry and she's Simplicity. We have an appointment for 10 o'clock. Ray smoothly announced their fake names. It was safe to say Lydia didn't like hers at all. Simplicity sounded like he was calling her dumb and a stripper at the same time. However, both were normal things in this place. The guard squinted at them. He was suspicious, but not because of the obviously fake names. Everyone here used fake names, but that a bunch of ragged-looking beggars like them actually had an appointment with the Lord. While Ray simply wore his divine robe, Mika and Lydia had done their best to get some clothes from a garbage bin to match his outfit. Against their expectations, this made their appearance here more suspicious to the guard. The man in question leaned into his guardhouse and brought out a clipboard, serving to create a funny scene. A man in medieval armor, at the gate of a mansion, surrounded by people in ragged robes, suddenly pulled out a very modern clipboard and ballpoint pen to check the list of names. The bigger question on Lydia's mind, however, was why they opted for something archaic as paper and didn't use a tablet. She didn't voice her question though. It seems you are right. You do have an appointment. I will let you in, but don't touch anything. If you dare to touch something and or do something else you are not supposed to, rest assured that you won't live long enough to regret it, he warned them, like they were common thieves that would start pocketing stuff the moment they entered. They didn't pick a fight with him for now and simply entered the premises and walked up to the entrance of the mansion, where they met a similar guard, checking their names again before they were allowed to enter. After waiting in a lavish salon for another quarter hour, they finally were guided before the great city lord. Filled with fragrant smoke, it was a room decorated with opulent fabrics and extravagant carpets. Many pillows populated the floor, surrounding the man sitting in the center, like a spider in its silken net. Shaolun, a sinewy man with copper skin, was reclining on a massive soft pillow as he was served by beautiful women of various races and dispositions. The group needed a moment to take in the foreign scenery, they only knew from historic flicks or fantasy movies. While they were still staring at the man, he leisurely lowered the long pipe he was just sucking and let a big bloom of thick smoke out of his mouth. As he moved, the many rings and bracelets on his hand glinted in the light that fell in through the glass ceiling. You paid a lot for this appointment, what is it that you want from me? He asked in a voice that sounded high-pitched, despite the age and the rasp of a smoker. The question forced them to pull her gaze off the women dancing around them and focus on the task ahead. Great Lord, we are looking for a slave you purchased some time ago. Her name is Meg Huffin, and her family would like to have her back, the ugly man spoke humbly. That is a difficult request, the city lord mumbled as he took another puff from his pipe. We are ready to reimburse you for any complications this may cause, Ray assured him quickly. Ah, that is obvious, but I can't give you what I do not have. I cherished Meg, but she was taken away by that accursed bird that keeps snatching people from my fields, Shaolun lamented. The three stared at the man, leisurely smoking after he dropped a "Your princesses at another castle" line on them. Chapter 966 Yet. It's Minasmar again. Delta, March 2nd days later. And so, to take responsibility for the recent incidents, I will step down as temporary chancellor, he ended his speech. It had actually happened. After the hideous terrorist attacks on Delta's granaries and the many more failed attempts that would have completely broken their infrastructure, the incompetency of Delta's leadership had become jarringly obvious. Finally, it peaked in this speech. Ichabod Longbottom and his staff under him were forced to take responsibility for the terrible mismanagement in recent months and step back from their post. But the driving force behind this was not the public outcry, but Krina's influence. Lena had a bitter expression as they were watching the live broadcast. The reason was that Krina actually wasn't supposed to get involved in local governance. The only exception was to stop other outside forces from taking control, and the princess was the one that had worked hard to give them the justification. She had done her best to prove that Spacia had gotten involved with Earth and they needed more support. Exchanging the bribed representative from Krina was a good step, but now they were using it as an excuse to get involved in Delta's politics. This was not her brother Hardwig's style, so it was most likely one of her less nice brothers behind this, or several of them. It didn't spell anything good. Lena, you look worried. Love asked her, friendly. A little, it's because I can't predict where this will go, but I just feel like it won't be something positive. She was convinced that the people behind the pressure from Krina would use this chance to fill the government of Delta with their own people. At that point, the princess had no idea what they would do with this influence. Maybe it even had something to do with Seth? At this point, She even started questioning whether those were really terrorist attacks or something her own people did to create this situation. During the incident with Y-City, she tried to prove that Spacia was involved, to get support from Krina. That was the first time she faced how ruthless and brash the central politics of Krina were able to be. She had been ridiculed and denounced for unfounded claims and favoritism. She had lost some of her faith in her home country. The princess realized that not everyone followed their founding principles as closely as she did. That they were using her evidence to get involved now just made it worse and showed how shameless they were. She suddenly felt a strong hand on her shoulder. She half expected it to be Seth or Finn, but it was Love who suddenly squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. She gazed into Lena's eyes as if she was able to read and understand all her worries. Don't worry too much. This place is strong, terrifyingly so. And I don't mean just the military might. This is not just a chance for them, is it? The deadly Fae asked mysteriously. The question was all Lena needed to realize what she meant. She was right, Minas Mar had long since stopped being a simple guild. Why would they stay out of this? Evie, how is it? Seth asked the immortal witch, once she wore the full set of death. The armor was pitch black, even darker than the nightly shadows. So dark that it was hard to make out any details of the armor. Except for the frosty circle in the center of her chest, Evie looked like someone cut the silhouette of a person out of the fabric of reality. It fits really well, she said, moving around and stretching. With a quick turn, she lashed around holding her hand like a revolver, and shot a bullet of pure darkness at close-by shrubbery that immediately started wilting away into a black sludge. They had moved a little further away from Minas Mar to a place where Evie could test her new armor. What she had just done was one of the two applications for the aura of decay Seth had built into the circuit. One could either emit it from the whole armor, creating a dome of death around them, or channel the power to the gloves and eject it in a directional attack. The pistol fingers were Evie's touch and had nothing to do with the functionality. This is actually quite fun, she exclaimed all giddy, like a child with a new toy. Seth couldn't help but smile, seeing that she was still able to feel this kind of childish glee despite the things she had gone through. It made the scene of her distributing death to the landscape almost heartwarming. I'm glad you like it. Say, Evie, what do you think about a little journey? The blacksmith tried to bring up the addition to the description of Garment of Sticks. A journey? What do you mean? She asked a little confused, why Seth suddenly brought up traveling. As an answer, he handed her the paper where Nico had written down all the options of the Gambeson, before explaining. If you bring the Gambeson to a temple of Hades or Persephone, there is a good chance it will further improve. I would also bet that Persephone may be inclined to bless the whole armor for you if you ask her nicely. However, there is no such temple on Earth, if you get what I mean. You want me to leave Earth? Did you forget our current situation? You will need me when Spacia comes, or those mongrels from the voracious cloud continent invade. You can't just send me away, she argued desperately. Seth looked at her confused. Who said anything about sending you away? You are going because the situation looks grim, not despite. If any of those things really happen, I want you to be at your peak. And you won't be alone if I manage to persuade the others. I think it would be good for Monique, Jonah, and the others to gain some experience abroad. They were all above Level 100 now, stepping on the path to legends. And this was also one of the reasons he wanted to send them out there. What legends needed to grow were challenges. Earth had more than enough of those, but what they also needed was recognition. People needed to know their greatness. Rumors of mighty conquests and battles had to spread to alleviate their status. Unlike Seth, who could accomplish this through his crafting, his battle-oriented friends needed fights and dungeons that would make them stand out. This was why many of the mighty adventurers they saw on media in Krina did their best to advertise themselves. The problem on Earth was that it was hard to stand out in the chaos and among the members of Minas March. Their individual contributions were often swallowed by the shadow of Minas March. It may seem a little cheatsy, but it would be easier for them to stand out in a foreign world, where they would be absolute powerhouses, just by being Orihumas. By challenging dangers, dungeons, and monsters the locals may shy away from, they would be able to gather great acclaim, for themselves and Seth as the maker of their equipment. They would be able to step away from the shroud of Minas Mar and grow on the path of legends. Seth booked on their strength being increased tremendously by the time they returned. And maybe, as a small side effect, the relics they had might also become legends, giving poor little Seth at home some more growth, too. I'm currently stagnating, there is only so much I can do to improve everyone's equipment. It's you guys who have to grow now, and I believe you have to leave to do so most effectively. Try to see it as a training camp to prepare for what is to come. Or a vacation of sorts, he joked a little to raise her mood. I guess I could use some free time to catch up with my brother, she said slowly after hearing the blacksmith's explanation. His words struck a chord and had her realize something. She had already noticed that she didn't know how to continue. Her path was the immortal necromancer. To raise it she had to do something big, massive even, to raise her legend and gain power of existence. No matter what she did on Earth, it barely made it on the news. Seth was right when he said, that most of the things they did were done aside with "oh, yeah. It's Mina's Mar again." It was probably the same for the others. She didn't want to leave, but she accepted that the bard was right. The best way to grow now, was for them to go to places where nobody knew them and gain a name for themselves. Whether they collected fame or notoriety, they had to spread their legends in new lands. Earth was too small, for them all to rise quickly at the same time. Great, then you can help me when I start persuading the others, he concluded with a bright smile. He wasn't looking forward to the conversation with Lena, Mary, and the others, since he doubted that they would agree to let them go at the current time. But the blacksmith had some aces up his sleeve. Chapter 967 Who Wants to Go? Once again, everyone of note within Mina's Mar was sitting in the same room. This time, the Tower Master had asked for presents. It was not often that Seth asked everyone to come to a meeting, so everyone thought it had to be important. Even Simon was invited. The only ones missing were Mike, Lydia, and Ray. Since nobody knew for how much longer they would be gone, they would be informed of the decision later. I'm glad all of you had the time to come to this spontaneous meeting, but it's not something that can wait. They opened the conversation once everyone was here. Although I am the Tower Master, I'm not your boss, so I wanted to give you the chance to voice your opinions and take the chance for myself to convince you of my plan. Evie has to leave Earth to visit a temple of Persephone or Hades. I think Monique's and Jonah's team, as well as the members of Lydia's team, should take this chance and also leave Earth to go on adventures for a couple of weeks. At least until we are ready to start the tournament. After a short explanation for today's meeting, he dropped the bomb. A silence followed. It wasn't a scene where everyone suddenly cried out, but they silently thought about it for a moment. It wasn't for nothing, that Seth had chosen the people he stayed with carefully. Some of them thought about it, others might just be waiting for his explanation before making up their mind. I'm sure some of you already felt it. I mean, it was obvious that growth would slow down after reaching Leave 100 and stepping on the path to legend, but, after opening the conversation, Seth told them the same he told Evie. That Earth was too small for all of them and their growth was stagnating as their achievements were attributed to Mina's Mar, instead of creating their own legends. Some of them, like Monique and Jonah, nodded solemnly. They were chosen of gods, but they seldom had a chance to shine, or even display all of their powers. With whole teams of stars, it was hard to shine individually. And playing babysitter for people who were too afraid to enter higher dungeons alone simply wasn't it. Still, the first doubt you had was probably the situation we are currently facing. The wave of cultivators, signs of Spacia making a move, but this is exactly why I want some of us to leave and grow quicker, so we will be strong enough to face the brewing storm. I hope some of you would accompany Evie. As for the others, I hoped Lena and Simon would be able to find suitable training spots for everyone, he ended, looking at the two people in question. Lena had been listening with pursed lips. She understood the truth in his words and the worth of letting the others gain fame in other worlds, but she was worried about the interim. Simon simply stayed silent, looking at what Lena had to say with a complicated expression. Aren't you forgetting something? If you send most of our strongest members away, what if something happens in the meantime? Lena voiced the thoughts of many that were not opposed to leaving, but worried about their home. Seth sighed, as he didn't want to say what he was about to say. Lena, I am here. Yule Cat's Fur are here. Love, Puffles, Tatzel, Karina, the Guardian Tree, the other Golems, the Oath Guard, the Fair. Did I mention that Ceres recently ascended to become a legend? I hate to say it, but if we face a danger all of us cannot stop, then the field teams won't be able to do it either, Seth said heavily. Of the things he listed, Ceres becoming a legend was probably the most shocking and reassuring point. The storm elemental automaton was already disgustingly strong, and now it had become a legend on top of it. While the non-combat members like Mary or Jane had a sad but understanding expression, some of the members of the field teams could only acknowledge this begrudgingly. All of them were strong and they had grown some confidence in their strength, but hearing and acknowledging that them being here or not made no big difference, was a hit on that confidence. But this only nurtured their decision to go along with Seth's plan. They would just have to grow even stronger so that they would become a major part of Myanmar's strength and protect their home. Nobody disagreed with the idea. Fine, I will help choose the best places, Lena finally gave in. If the princess agrees, I will also do my best to help in the name of the system church, Simon also agreed. Good, all that is left is choosing who goes. Let's start with volunteers, who wants to go? Seth asked the people in question. You already convinced me earlier, but I would like to go with just my brother instead of a group. Is that okay? She asked honestly. Since Seth had talked to her about it, she had seen this trip as an actual chance to spend time and catch up on things with her brother, just the two of them. Evie and Edward had been part of Mike's team for expeditions into the abyss, so their going on their own was not an impediment to the party structure of other teams. Evie alone, with her new armor, was also more than strong enough to go solo if she wanted to. I would like to leave alone, Monique said after pondering for a moment. She had various reasons, but there were two big ones. The first was that she actually didn't enjoy being a party leader and missed going solo. The other was that she knew her team. I don't want to leave my daughter alone for that long, Tekker, the massive tank, voiced his opinion after his party leader, indirectly supporting her decision. Going on an adventure won't help me to become a legendary alchemist, there is no need for me to go out there. Allison also didn't want to leave. Link, who was aiming for a legendary chef path, also said something similar. I worked really hard to return here. I don't want to leave again so soon. Linri, the priestess of the fount, also didn't want to leave. She had stepped on the path of a legendary healer, so she would be able to grow by doing good deeds. It was not necessary for her to go on adventures either. Volko and Lixus had no intention of leaving Myanmar with just the two of them, either. Since there was no chance that Mina and Finn would leave Seth again, and Mike was on his own mission, the two also stayed. We would like to go together, Jess and James voiced their wish to God on the journey as a couple in sync. As they said that, they stared into each other's eyes like they planned to go on a honeymoon and not a dangerous adventure. Then the three of us will also leave together, Phaenis spoke up for the other half of Lydia's team. The mountain brigand from a foreign world, the priest from Earth, and the former leader of Chimeras, Azul were a good combination, even without a dedicated tank. The last team to speak up was Jonah's, but they followed the trend. Beamont and Ellie wished to stay in Earth. One was Seth's vassal and wouldn't be able to outgrow Seth anyway. Ellie wanted to concentrate on breeding slimes and not be stuck on an adventure. As for Shay, he also decided to stay with Ellen. This left Jonah Dohu, Archer, and Misto to make their decision. Surprisingly, they decided to split into two double teams. Jonah decided to leave with the Mist Demon, while Dohu and the Silent Archer decided to stay together for this journey. Great, now all that's left is choosing the place and organizing the journey for each of the teams. I can leave that to you two, right? Seth asked Lena and Simon. The choice of world where they would go was important. It made little sense if they were too peaceful, but they also couldn't be too violent. They needed worlds that would offer the best chances to gather accomplishments and spawn rumors to spread their names. Since all of them were strong enough to make it in Earth and were covered in legendary and relic-rated items, they wouldn't have any difficulty making it in the various normal worlds of the Krna Empire. I will talk about it in detail with the princess, Simon agreed. Since everything was settled, they finally ended the meeting. Everyone left, thinking about their own thoughts and ambitions for the upcoming adventure. Soon, Seth was alone in the room. Now that things were actually settled and the plans for so many of his friends to leave took shape, Seth became a little emotional. The blacksmith had brought it up because he genuinely thought that this was the best path for everyone to take and it wasn't like he forced anyone. Yet, he couldn't help but feel a little sad thinking of them leaving. Myanmar would feel emptier without them. His thoughts were interrupted by a small hand that touched his shoulder. Is everything okay? Finn asked him. Mina was also standing in the door in the back. The two had not left without him. I guess. Let's talk about it over a drink, Mina suggested with a naughty grin. It had been a while since they simply got drunk. Seth felt like it was a good time to get drunk. Chapter 968 on credit. After a night of excess, Seth struggled to get out of bed. He was tightly bound by the two girls hugging him. The floor was covered in empty bottles of booze. It took quite a lot for them to get drunk. They didn't just drink away the night. The three had talked for a long time and their support helped Seth overcome many of his doubts. He had a hard time remembering what exactly they talked about, but he felt much better and more motivated today. If he was honest with himself, he had felt like he was not getting anywhere in the past few weeks. His level was maxed out, he still stagnated at Master Level 1. This was why he had concentrated on passion projects and necessary projects, but now that Mike was still away and nothing big was up for him to do. Making the decision to send his friends away was like a big turning point because it also meant that he acknowledged that he currently couldn't help them improve even further with his items. Getting his hands on legendary materials was more about chance than plan. He couldn't shake the perfect legendary items for them out of his sleeves. They had to leave and grow on their own now. The blacksmith on the other hand had felt a little lost as to what to do from here on out. He wasn't willing to make oodles and noodles of relic-rated items to grind his way to Master Level 2, just to face the hurdle of Master Level 3. After the long night of drinking and talking and letting everything out, he felt like something was uncorked and he had a revelation in what direction to go next. He had chosen the call of the Maestro as the specialization of his Infernal Scald class. He had chosen the path of the legendary forger. The Maestro specialized in becoming the master of everything and the legendary forger, although it sounded like a blacksmith class, was at no point restricted to only legendary blacksmith's materials. This became clear to him when his thoughts were fogged by alcohol. The way to continue was to expand. Composer of Fusion would level up with every crafting skill he mastered and every skill he mastered would further allow him to work with a greater range of legendary materials, which also meant he would be able to forge a greater range of legendary materials. What all of this culminated to was Seth's decision to grind. But not his master tier skills, but all of his other crafting skills. Sewing, carpentry, alchemy. Especially in alchemy, he saw a great potential for forging legendary ingredients. If he was able to use his power of existence to turn normal ingredients into legendary ones, it might have an even greater impact than legendary armaments. And the first step to all of that was a visit to Arjit Noer's embassy. They had yet to come by and get their golems. This also meant they had yet to pay. He needed to secure funds for all the materials he would need to grind the skills. In the case of alchemy, he even needed double, since he didn't plan on leaving Allison behind. He needed her to help him with the recipes and in exchange, they would burn through a lot of money together and become master alchemists. Similarly, he could help and learn from Nadal once he arrived and they could become master tailors together. Then he also wouldn't need Nico's help to see the options of tailor products. Carpentry with Craftsman Level 2 was actually the closest to the master tier and he didn't need any external materials. But first, he wanted to get an explanation from Arjit Noer and his money if possible. Although he had amassed quite a fortune, he doubted his personal funds were enough for his plans. Of course, he could take it directly from Minas Mar's coffers, what else was all the money they earned in the tree stations for? But he wanted to see the deal with the golems finished first. This was another of his doubts. Ever since facing his past in the illusion of the cultivators, he felt that he was acting too passive. Always on the defense, always preparing. That was why he decided to act more proactively to get what he wanted. Seth got dressed, ate breakfast, gave the sleeping Finn and Mina a morning kiss, and left for Delta. After the treaty between Delta, Minas Mar, and Arjit Noer, the Empire of the Undead was allowed to have an embassy in Delta. Without the constant drive of the Gamma resistance, the hostility toward the undead in Delta had lowered and the instances of rotten eggs being thrown at their embassy had lowered to twice a day. It was a great improvement, as far as Seth heard. The embassy of Arjit Noer was also close to the parliament at the center of Delta. The embassy of Arjit Noer was close to the parliament, where Ichabod Longbottom had recently held his big press conference about taking responsibility and stepping back. The man didn't cover himself with glory in the year he was in power. An opportunistic, corrupt, and easily manipulated man, if Seth had not felt an immediate dislike for him and offended him right from the start, Mary might have found him useful. They had no qualms about bribing people, but there was also nothing they wanted from Delta at the time. He was distracted for a moment, but quickly focused on the purpose of being here. The Embassy of the Undead Empire was the building that used to hold the representatives of Lambda, when Delta was still the seat of the central government. Originally, they wanted to give the former Embassy of Gamma, since they were occupying the former area of Gamma, but apparently, the protests were even worse at that time. The blacksmith stepped up to the Death Knights guarding the entrance of the building, who promptly crossed their weapons to block his way. "Tell your masters that the Tower Master of Minas Mar is here." After saying what he wanted to say, Seth stood aside and waited. He was no expert on necromancy, but it was common knowledge that a necromancer and his high-ranking summons shared a pseudo-telepathic connection. As expected, it didn't take long for someone to rush out from the embassy. It was Larish, the female dark elf who acted as one of the ambassadors of Arjit Noor. Tower Master. I'm sorry, we didn't expect you, she exhaled out of breath. Her dark robes looked slightly disheveled, and she was gasping as she had just run down several tens of floors using the stairs. Well, would you have come out if I notified you beforehand? He asked, slightly amused. What do you mean? She asked awkwardly. We made a deal, I offered a discount, and you made an order, but for some reason, nobody came to get the batch of golems and nobody paid either. I came to give you the chance to explain. Where is my money? The bard asked in a sweet tone. Tower Master, you have to give us some more time. There are difficulties in Arjit Noor that got in the way of coming up with the lump sum, she said nervously. Difficulties? Seth asked, raising an eyebrow suspiciously. Maybe, we could talk inside? It's a delicate situation. She prompted him to follow and led him to a repurposed meeting room. What once was a room with a long desk, chairs, and probably a beamer on the ceiling, had turned into a medieval-seeming salon with ancient, ornamental recliners and a small coffee table. Only the beamer on the ceiling still bore witness to its original function, although the beamer now acted as a fixture for a chandelier with magic crystals illuminating the room. Please take a seat, Tower Master, she offered, pointing to an expensive-looking recliner. Obediently sat on it, before focusing on Larish again, who was taking cover behind the big desk. I think you can tell me now about this delicate situation, he spoke softly, but in Larish's ears, it was like his voice filled the room. Yes, I think the Tower Master deserves to know. We recently had a problem with insurgents in Gamma. Somebody keeps wrestling away the control of the undead, hampering our efforts to collect the money and resources to exchange for the golems. The capital is being caught up in internal skirmishes that keep sabotaging the teleportation formation. Since they are lacking in manpower, they are having a hard time subduing the fights quickly, she explained after hesitating for just a moment. Oh? Why are you lacking manpower all of a sudden? His sweet voice seeped into her ear. I don't think I should tell you this, she resisted the voice of the demonic bard. Why not? I assure you, that you can trust me. I won't tell anybody, he promised. But you might get angry. I can't. I definitely won't be angry. You worry too much, he kept imbuing his voice with mana, using several of his skills to persuade her. What could it be that she tried to resist so strongly? Most of the troops are out, catching more people to exchange for golems. However, we lost contact with them over 3 weeks ago, she answered hesitantly. The blacksmith needed a moment to process what he had just heard. How cheeky were they? He gave them a great deal to get people out of their slavery and then decided it was a great idea to simply go and catch more people to exchange. Now he was unsure whether it should calm him, or disturb him, that Arjit Noor's troops vanished shortly after leaving Gamma. They didn't accomplish their goal, but what exactly was able to wipe out their forces in a manner that they couldn't even notify their home base? It wasn't like they could use home call, since they were not players, but he was sure Arjit Noor had the means for quick long-range communication. Knowing what they tried left a bitter taste in Seth's mouth, but it didn't stop him from offering them an olive branch. They were still a buffer that would stand against Spatia, once the time came. I will lend you the first squad of Golem Knights to secure the teleport channels. You better pay up as soon as possible, once they arrive, he said magnanimously. Of course, you will have to pay rent on them, until you pay for them, he added, not as magnanimously. Up front, he added seriously, looking at Larish. His gaze made it clear that the ambassadors would have to pay in advance before he sent the golems. How much? Larish asked carefully. I will be nice and say, 1 gold per week, per golem. Since I will send 30 golems, that would mean 30 gold you have to pay me now, and I will send the golems through the teleport formation of Minas Palin. I will have to contact my superiors in La Roche, but I think that is appropriate. Well, do it now. I want an answer and the money before I leave. Okay, the elf gave in pitifully and started contacting people. Chapter 969. Do you want to grind a potion? Seth's insistence paid well. After a cup of tea, the pair of dark elves not only scraped together 30 gold, but 60, asking for 2 Golem Knight squads to be sent. The blacksmith was not someone who said no to free money and accepted their payment readily. After all, this was not a down payment, but rent for 60 golem nights for 1 week. They would still have to pay the price later on. Since he couldn't just squeeze out the full amount and there was nothing more he could do in this place, Seth's next stop was the system bank. Using his crystal card, he cashed out a whopping 2,000 gold, only leaving 10 on his account. With over 2,500 gold in his inventory, he returned to Mina's March. Motivated, he knocked at the door of the laboratory. "Allison, do you want to grind a potion? Come on, let's go and raise a skill," he serenaded. "I'm busy. I never see you anymore, come stop singing out there and just come in," she interrupted him defeated. "What do you want?" she asked after he came in. She had been bent of an old grimoire she had taken from the tower library. "Ask you what you want," he answered with a smile. "I decided that the best direction for me to pursue is to raise my other crafting skills. Since your goal was to become a master alchemist, I thought that we could do it together. You come up with an efficient grinding plan, I will buy us the materials we need. No need to think about what Mina's Mar needs, we will just make the potions that raise the most proficiency," Seth explained, waving his portable VIP access to the auction house in front of her face. Nico Booz was able to become a master tailor because of the support from Puffles. Now Seth was going to support Allison, and himself, to do the same. If they kept buying epic materials to make epic potions in great quantities, then Allison, and especially, Seth would be able to raise their skill quickly. "Are you serious?" she asked, looking up from her book in wonder. Although Mina's Mar had their own herb garden that was tended to by the children of Karina using the nature magic she taught them, they still needed to buy in many ingredients that were normal to the system and many recipes Allison and the other alchemists they employed had unlocked as part of their profession. "Yep, I am. Anything I want?" she asked again, to make sure. So far, Allison had been quite frugal, since even the normal alchemy ingredients were expensive and had to be supplied through the system church. Seth offering her to make whatever she wanted to improve her skill made her happy, but she needed a moment to grasp the concept of not trying to save money. "As long as you make the plan for both of us to reach the master tier, I will pay for all the materials from my own pocket," he assured her. "All right, I will make a plan and a list of materials," she finally answered with a twinkle in her eyes. It was rare to see Allison this motivated, which was inexplicably heartwarming and alarming at the same time. He slowly retreated from the alchemy lab, leaving her to her own devices. Seth's next destination was outside Mina's Mars gates. "Asterion, how are you doing?" he asked the massive minotaur, swinging his axe in training. His body was glistening as he moved in the cold mountain air. "Great. Tatzel and Puffles are very considerate and I actually got the chance for some workouts since Ceres and Python are gone," the gatekeeper said happily. Seth didn't quite know what one had to do with the other, but he smiled anyway. Before he could say something, a big shadow appeared over their heads. They had called Puffles earlier and the nightmare centipede had arrived. Like always when they were home, Puffles and Tatzel would do their own thing, instead of hanging around in his pet space. "You said you needed the help of the Great Me," the centipede with a white ceramic-like carapace and golden marking landed before them and asked haughtily. As he spoke, his size started to reduce until he was the size of a stela. It was the magic he learned from Tatzel, but he refined it to keep his appearance of a centipede, instead of becoming a cute little, chubby bug. "Right to business, did I interrupt you on something?" Seth asked, a little surprised by Puffles' attitude. "Nothing that can't wait. Don't forget that you promised me 10 tubs of ice cream," the Ivisor reminded him of his promise. "Ah, so that was it." Puffles just wanted to hurry, so he could get his promised munchies. Seth still had a hard time understanding how the Ivisor became such a sweet tooth. Maybe it was a natural disposition when one took into consideration that Ivisors would usually eat minerals and ores that should be quite savory by definition. Okay. Nadal and Tord will join us soon and I also want to raise my sewing skill together with Nadal's to the master tier. Puffles, I need to you produce a lot of ancient bronze and celestial bronze thread until then," he explained telepathically. Ancient bronze was an uncommon metal when molten down, but as a thread, it had a rare rating. Celestial bronze on the other hand was a rare metal, but an epic thread. To raise his sewing he would need both since he was only an adept, while Nadal would mostly benefit from the latter as a craftsman. Of course, there was Skysilk, but only Nico and Puffles were currently able to effectively work with it. The other two were enough for the start. The Ivisor's now tiny mandibles moved a little, secreting fluid, as he thought about Seth's request. "Okay, but that will be 20 tubs. The advisor agreed, but he drove a hard bargain. Seth squinted at the cunning business bug but finally agreed with a sigh. All right. 10 tubs now and another 10 after the first batch, deal. Deal. After coming to an agreement with Allison and making a deal with Puffles, there was only one person he had to spring the good news on. Soon, Seth, with Puffles wrapped around his shoulders like a scarf, crashed into the tailor workshop. Good news, everyone, he announced happily, to the crowd of tailors and Nico Boos, who were staring at him. All of you will get the chance to raise your weaving skill in the coming week, Seth announced happily. Wait, Seth. What do you mean? The tailor master asked, perplexed. Naddle, a tailor craftsman, will join us soon, and I also want to raise my sewing skill. While Puffles will produce the needed thread, you guys will turn it into fabric over the next week, he explained the good news. But, most of us have their own project right now, we can't just. Nico attempted to argue. It's not often I make it known, but I am the tower master and head of the crafting team. You will keep doing what you were doing. Everyone else will work the looms to prepare the fabric for me and Naddle. That has the highest priority from now on until I say otherwise. Seth knew that he was a little unreasonable, but it was all for the sake of preparing for the future. Their projects could wait for a week or two. It wasn't like they didn't gain anything from it, since weaving was a tailoring skill that could improve the power of the produced fabrics. They would only gain from it in the future. Puffles will stay here for the time being and keep making thread. Master Puffles will stay here, too. Nico asked, even more shocked. After all, Puffles was like a mentor to Boos, who had become a tailor of Ivice. And the advisor was a strict mentor. Yes, I will stay and make sure you aren't wasting my efforts. The nightmare centipede announced to all of them. They all had conflicted expressions. The advisor's advice could help them grow, but having someone constantly looking over their shoulder would be quite stressful. Well, then, I will leave it to you guys. Don't disappoint me. After dropping work on them, Seth scampered off to see Karina. The easiest material to come by for the skills he intended to raise was wood for carpentry. Since it would take time for the fabric and Allison's plan to be prepared, he decided to start there first. Chapter 970. Grant May. Seth had recently learned that a comprehensive build-up of experience and knowledge could majorly improve the power of items, even without relying on the inherent rating of the material. He didn't have the time or capacity to do so at the moment. There were still many things he didn't know in smithing and enchantment, that he had yet to learn and comprehend. Skipping this step by using the material rating of special skills to make high-rated items without the foundation was a cheat not many could abuse as readily as Seth. Although creating the foundation with time and effort led to better results, the blacksmith decided to simply grind the skills. After all, he had no intention to become a sublime carpenter or an omniscient alchemist. He was a blacksmith, he wanted to stay one. Even his bardic skills were just a support to his original class, outside of combat. It was no different for these other skills. The ultimate goal was to quickly improve his skills as a maestro in this way. If he needed more knowledge in brewing potions, tailoring, or working wood, he could always gain it at a later time. He had made that decision and intended to go through with it. Entering the cavern of the original hanging tree, which had now become a legendary guardian tree, Seth stepped to its trunk and knocked against it, like knocking against a door. Karina, can you hear me? He asked the tree and waited. Moments later the dryad stepped out of the tree, as if it was just an illusion that hid her. How can I help you, Seth? She asked helpfully. She seemed in a good mood. Was her cooperation with Evan on the creation of a subway connection between the tree stations going well, or was she just happy to get away from that work? I will be working on raising my carpentry skill from now on, and I hoped you could make me a storage of epic and relic rated wood to use, he requested from her. Oh, was that all? I hoped, maybe, she stammered and seemed a little disappointed. It seemed that she not quite enjoyed working with Evan. Who would have thought that the benign Karina would be able to get along with the tamer? You know, THRES is still waiting for their tree. Maybe, if you finish this quickly, you could travel there and expand the net of tree stations. Seth offered her a juicy reward. At the same time, he would be able to catch up on the promise he had made. After all, Mike had reported that Adam really did his best to restore the city for people to live in. Maybe there were some survivors from Beta, or even THRES that managed to flee from Y City and wished to return to their home. Whether people actually moved there, or not, was not Seth's business. The Moor Empire had not the best reputation because of their invasion attempts in the beginning of the apocalypse. Maybe there were people who could look past that for Adam's sake. Deal. A nice vodka, a work trip is just what I need for a change of environment, she said happily. Maybe it was just Seth's imagination, but he felt that Karina had become more lively after her tree became the guardian tree. She started right away, sending Seth away with a load of wooden blocks and dowels just an hour later. With his new motivation and a truckload of wood, Seth returned to his workshop, to start doing carpentry. This time he had no intention to honor the technical skills of the craft and cheat with all of his other skills. This was about quantity and speed, all that mattered was that the finished product counted as a product of the carpentry skill, so he would gain proficiency. There was no meticulous carving of a bow, no gluing of layers, the closest he came to actually working the wood was cutting notches for the bowstring and sanding the bow smooth. Other than that, he shamelessly forged the bows on his anvil, producing a simple bow blank at a pace of roughly 5 per hour. Every time he finished 10, he would take half an hour to sand them down, add the string, and refine them to make sure they bend correctly for smooth and accurate shooting. This meant he finished 10 epic bows every 2,5 hours. Ding! Your skill Carpentry, Craftsman, Leave 2 has become Carpentry, Craftsman, Leave 3. After finishing the first them bows his level rose. He was still early in the Craftsman tier of Carpentry, so gaining proficiency with epic items was not hard, but just this first level up already halved the proficiency he got for the same bow. Yet, Seth continued for a while making another 1,5 batches of bows. Still quite relaxed, Seth finished his day when he was done with his 2,5 thbow. Neither was it very late nor was the blacksmith tired. The reason he stopped here was because there was another person he wanted to visit before they got off work. Grant May, the best of the 3 enchanters they had hired and nurtured. He had shown the biggest growth among the 3 with a special talent for weapon enchantments. The reason was quite simple, the bows were a little too plain to sell in the auction house as they were. Apart from their incredibly high basic stats, the bows only had the disposition of the guardian tree, which was not very helpful on a projectile weapon. There was a lifesteal effect, but only if the bow was directly used as a club, but melee damage would purely rely on the user's stats and would not see any improvement. The 20% raise in defense, when defending one's allies was quite okay, but very conditional. This was why Seth had the idea, to give all of these blanks he and later on Nadal would make for training, to the enchanters to raise their proficiency and the price in the auction. This way they struck several birds with one stone. Grant, are you still here? Seth announced his presence as he entered the enchantment lab, one of the ones Alzalsar had renovated before she got her own place. This was the domain of the enchanters, magicians who specialized in imbuing items through a row of magic formations, spells, and arcane materials. It was a very complicated science. Seth knew some of the principles and formulas, but it was still far outside his expertise. Tower Master, the man in question asked sleepily. He found Grant at a desk in the back, bending over a bunch of notes that showed fresh stains of saliva. This guy had actually fallen asleep at his desk and drooled all over his notes. Grant, you should really think more about your own health. Staying long to the point that you fall asleep in the lab isn't healthy or helpful. I'm sorry, Tower Master. I just wanted to finish this before returning. Oh no, anguished he looked at the notes he drooled on. Some parts were illegible, other parts were barely more than the doodles of someone lacking sleep. It was clear from his expression, that his sleep-deprived self had not done any useful work. With a sigh, he threw the paper in the bin. Anyways, what can I do for you, Tower Master? I told you Seth was okay, but, forget it. Here, enchant these 25 bows as you see fit and bring them to me when you are done. It doesn't have to be anything special, since I will be selling those on the auction house. Seth looked at the man and halted for a moment. Maybe it was not his place to say something, as he had just brought him more work, but he was also his boss and responsible for the guy. And take your time, it isn't urgent. Try looking after yourself a little more. I know it's hard to let go of a captivating task, but you should look after yourself a little more. The workaholic who learned his lesson, relayed his wisdom to the slightly younger man. Sure. Thank you, Seth, the enchanter answered, hesitatingly calling the blacksmith by his name. Well, then, I will leave you to your work, or rather, you should go get to bed and continue tomorrow. With that, Seth vanished using the tower's teleportation and returned home to spend the evening with Finn and Mina.